A fully grown woman in a sun hat and rhinestone cover-up doing the backstroke in my pool while DJ equipment blasts Pitbull on my lawn wasn't how I planned to spend my Saturday morning. I wasn't hosting a party. I wasn't invited to the party. Heck, I didn't even know there was a party, until I looked out my kitchen window, toothbrush still in my mouth, and saw 30 or 40 people splashing around in what I quickly realized was my backyard. A banner that read, "Congrats Tiffany," was strung between two palm trees that I definitely hadn't planted, and there were two shirtless men grilling what I can only describe as meat-like objects on a barbecue that also didn't belong to me. You know that moment when your brain short-circuits because what you're seeing is so stupid it physically hurts? Yeah. That. The Karen in question was none other than Charlene, president of the HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. Her daughter, Tiffany, was apparently graduating community college for the third time and had earned a pool party. So naturally, Charlene had decided that my property, a private lot with the biggest pool in the neighborhood, was the perfect venue. Never mind that the gate was locked. Never mind that I'd installed cameras. Never mind that I don't have children and have never spoken to Tiffany longer than 5 seconds in the mailbox queue. She wanted a party, and she wanted it to look good on Instagram. So, she made it happen. Without me. I stepped outside still in pajamas, phone recording everything, and calmly said, "Excuse me, did I get amnesia, or did someone just throw a rager on my private property without asking?" A few partygoers glanced my way with the glazed, mildly panicked look of people who had definitely made a mistake but were now committed to the bit. Charlene, mid-laugh in a pool float shaped like a giant swan, waved dismissively like I was a mosquito. "Oh, relax, Logan. It's for Tiffany. You weren't using the pool anyway." She said it like that made perfect sense, like I was the unreasonable one for expecting my own property to remain unoccupied unless I said otherwise. Now, here's where I could have gone full nuclear immediately. Cops, trespassing charges, social media flame war, but that's not how I operate. See, I don't throw punches. I file paperwork. I play long-term chess while they're out here losing at checkers. I just smiled and said, "Of course. Carry on." Then I turned and walked back inside. That's when the real fun began. First, I made a phone call to my lawyer, Jeff, who specializes in property disputes and has a particular flair for humiliating HOAs. Then I sent copies of my security footage to my insurance company, complete with timestamps and facial recognition logs. Finally, I called animal control, not because there were animals, but because I noticed someone had brought an emotional support ferret and those require paperwork when brought onto someone else's property. It was like lining up dominoes. I wasn't going to push them yet, but oh, I would. The party dragged on for hours. Apparently, the theme was Palm Springs Glam, which explained the inflatable flamingos and disturbingly aggressive color palette. Every now and then someone would wander toward the house and peek through my windows, probably wondering if the homeowner was going to offer snacks. I didn't. I did, however, call the utility company to flag a suspicious spike in water usage. Then I set up my Bluetooth speakers and began blasting a 12-hour loop of legally distinct royalty-free polka remixes. Loud enough to be heard from the pool. Not loud enough to break the noise ordinance. That's important. By sunset, Tiffany was passed out in a deck chair wearing a tiara that said she believed she could, so she did, and Charlene was half drunk in my hot tub yelling at someone named Amber to refill the Prosecco. I stepped out again, this time in a suit, holding a clipboard. "Charlene," I said evenly, "I'm going to need you and your guests to vacate the premises. You're currently trespassing, violating at least 6 HOA bylaws, and damaging my property. You've got 10 minutes before the sheriff gets here." She laughed. "Logan, be serious. We're neighbors. I run the HOA. You can't evict me from your pool." That's when the gate opened, and 2 sheriff's deputies stepped in. Not in a rush. Calm, almost apologetic. One of them nodded toward me. "You must be Mr. Hall. We received your statement, And we've got the footage you emailed. He turned to Charlene. Ma'am, we're going to have to ask everyone to leave immediately. This is private property. The look on her face was worth every dollar I'd spent on surveillance cameras. She stood there dripping wet, mascara halfway down her cheeks, still clutching a plastic champagne flute. But this is outrageous. I have clout. I know the mayor. The deputy just raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist. That's when Charlene tried to swim away. I swear on my grandmother's ashes, this woman, fully grown, turned around, launched herself into the deep end, and attempted a slow-motion backstroke toward the opposite edge of the pool like she was going to escape arrest through sheer water resistance. The other guests stood frozen in awkward horror, phones out but not sure whether to record or help. The sheriff walked along the edge of the pool like a disappointed lifeguard. Ma'am, out of the water. Now. When she refused, I simply reached over and pushed a button on my phone. The pool lights turned red. The jets stopped. The sound system cut out mid-kesha. And then, quietly, the hidden speaker under the diving board began playing Gregorian chant music. Loudly. Charlene paused mid-stroke and blinked up at me. What the hell is happening? You've just been evicted mid-backstroke, I said. Then I walked inside and locked the door. The deputies took care of the rest. The guests slithered off, looking extremely hydrated and extremely embarrassed. Charlene was escorted out wearing a pool robe with Trophy MOM embroidered on the back. It was glorious. But this was just the beginning. Because Charlene didn't just break into my yard. She violated something much more sacred. She broke the unspoken rule of suburban warfare. Don't start a feud with the quiet guy who knows how to read contract. The morning after the aquatic fiasco, my backyard looked like the aftermath of a sorority demolition derby. Wet Solo cups floated lazily in the pool, sunscreen-streaked towels littered the lounge chairs, and a half-eaten sheet cake reading "Tiff's Time to Shine" was melting into a swarm of sugar-drunk ants. But Charlene's real mistake wasn't the glitter confetti or the 2 broken planters she clearly thought were decorative extras. It was leaving behind her laptop, unlocked, unguarded, and sitting on a poolside table next to an empty mimosa glass and a pair of flamingo-shaped sunglasses. It was like finding a war plan scribbled on a napkin, if the war was waged in passive-aggressive next-door posts and CC'd complaint emails. Now, I didn't go through it. I'm not an idiot. But I did make sure it ended up in the hands of the deputies when they came back later that morning to file the final trespassing report. One of them gave me a knowing nod. She's gonna have a rough time explaining this one. I nodded back, sipping coffee from my world's most litigious neighbor mug. The mug was a gag gift. I'd earned it. By noon, I'd already filed damage estimates with my insurance provider. The destroyed patio furniture, cracked tiles, and mysteriously missing pool skimmer all added up to a not-so-small fortune, about 10 grand. But what really caught their attention was the flagrant abuse of property rights and HOA violations caught on my security cameras. And here's the kicker. Charlene had not only broken HOA bylaws by trespassing, she'd also explicitly violated the HOA President Conduct Clause, which I didn't even know existed until Jeff, my lawyer, gleefully read it aloud over the phone. Apparently, it was buried in the HOA charter from 1997, probably written back when everyone still believed in fax machines and neighborly decency. It outlined, in no uncertain terms, that any officer found abusing their position for personal gain or knowingly violating property boundaries could be forcibly removed from their post by a unanimous vote of the HOA board. Charlene had ruled that board with the iron fist of a board mall cop for 6 years, but now, finally, she'd given them cause to break free. I just had to nudge it along. So I got to work. Step 1. Gather the resistance. You'd be surprised how quickly suburban loyalty crumbles when wine moms and golf dads smell blood in the water. I paid a visit to the Flanagans across the street. Their kid once got fined $50 by Charlene for having sidewalk chalk that was too neon. They were in. Next up were the Jaspers, who still had an active grievance over a holiday light citation from 3 years ago. And then I got Mrs. Park, the retired schoolteacher, whose unauthorized flagpole resulted in a 6-month HOA Cold War. Not only was she in, she brought cookies and a color-coded presentation. Within 48 hours we had the vote. 8-0. I drafted a formal petition for Charlene's removal and emailed it to the board. I also scheduled a special meeting for the vote. Per the bylaws, anyone could call one with sufficient cause. And hosting an unsanctioned mimicafest on someone else's private property? That was sufficient. Step 2. Get the water company involved. See, what most of the neighborhood didn't realize is that the HOA's fancy fountains, irrigation systems, and ornamental pond all relied on a secondary water contract signed with a private utility, a company I just so happened to be a major stakeholder in, thanks to a recent property deal I'd closed 2 months earlier. I wasn't the CEO, but I knew the guy. And more importantly, I knew the clause in their HOA's service agreement that stated service could be paused or reviewed, pending legal investigation involving misuse or misrepresentation of communal property by board officials. You better believe I submitted that footage to their legal team. They froze all non-essential water service to the HOA's shared assets pending further inquiry. Charlene's ornamental fish pond? Dry. Fountain outside the clubhouse? Weekly turf misting? Suspended. It was a drought, but targeted. Charlene, of course, didn't go quietly. She stormed into my driveway the day after I sent the board my petition, wearing a visor, yoga pants, and the fury of 1,000 tiny HOA grievances. She waved a pink clipboard in my face and shrieked, "You can't do this! You are not allowed to hold meetings without my approval." I took a step back, raised my coffee, and replied, "Actually, per Section 4 subsection C of the HOA Charter, any member in good standing may call a meeting provided quorum is met. Which it will be. Also, Charlene, you're currently trespassing again. Please step back onto the sidewalk before I have to call our mutual friends at the sheriff's office." She looked like she wanted to throw the clipboard at me, but realized the security camera above the garage door was blinking red. She stomped back to the curb, yelling, "You've always been a problem, Logan. Always undermining everything I do." I gave her a slight smile. "No, Charlene. I just know how to read the rules you pretend to enforce." The meeting was held at the clubhouse. Ironically, the very one Charlene had denied others access to for years unless she personally deemed their events classy enough. I showed up early and set up a screen playing the pool party footage on loop, complete with freeze frames highlighting Charlene's swan float and the moment she tried to swim away from police custody. We even had popcorn. The board voted unanimously to remove her. Tiffany, still slightly sunburned and mortified, showed up halfway through to collect her mom, who was now banned from holding any official HOA position indefinitely. As they left, someone shouted, "Don't forget your laptop," and handed her the soggy MacBook in a Ziploc bag. It was brutal. It was beautiful. But I wasn't done. Now that Charlene was out, we had to deal with the damage she'd caused over the years. Random fines, shady favoritism, and selective enforcement of landscaping regulations. So I proposed an audit. Not just financial, but procedural. We started going through her records, and wouldn't you know it, there were several instances where she had borrowed HOA funds for emergency improvements that conveniently ended up being additions to her own backyard, new pergola, hot tub upgrade, even a fancy outdoor kitchen allegedly for board meetings. We passed the audit results to the local municipal board and the HOA's insurance provider. Charlene might have thought the pool party would be a social triumph, but it turned out to be the stone that cracked her HOA empire. The sheriff's office officially opened an investigation into financial misconduct. She lawyered up within the week. Meanwhile, I finally got my yard repaired and the pool cleaned. Insurance covered most of it, and the HOA reimbursed the rest after the new board voted on it. I even threw my own little pool gathering, invite only, no flamingo floats, no DJ Pitbull, just a few neighbors who'd earned it. We toasted marshmallows, watched the sunset, and raised our glasses to one universal truth. Never start a suburban war with someone who reads the fine print. Charlene may have lost her crown, but she still had fangs. 3 days after her ousting, I received a thick envelope in the mail, courier delivered, no less. It was from a law office I'd never heard of, with the kind of name that screams, someone's paying us way too much to look threatening. Whitmore, Ellington and Bray. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming I had harassed, defamed, and orchestrated the public humiliation of a private citizen, with a delightful bonus threat of civil action for emotional trauma. The letter was 6 pages long and read like it had been written with a thesaurus and a bottle of boxed wine. One sentence actually said, "Our client, a respected figure in the community, has suffered irreparable psychic wounds due to your vindictive campaign." Psychic wounds. Because I caught her doing the backstroke in my pool without permission. I didn't panic. I did, however, email Jeff. He read the letter, snorted, and said, "She hired a PR firm disguised as lawyers. This is a scare tactic. Want me to respond in Latin or legalese?" I picked legalese. We drafted a polite yet firm reply outlining the video evidence, the list of damages, the HOA bylaw violations, and the fact that Charlene herself had called the cops on other people for far less. I also included copies of the trespassing report and the HOA audit findings. That's when the noise stopped. Not another letter. Not another text. Just silence. It was almost disappointing. Almost. That silence lasted precisely 1 week, until the paint incident. It started small. One evening I noticed a strange patch of beige creeping along the brick column at the edge of my driveway. It was subtle, but it wasn't the same color as the rest of my house. I ran my hand over it, still wet. Which was odd, because I hadn't painted anything in years. The next morning, it had spread. Someone had painted over the corner trim and a section of my front fence, badly. Drips, brush streaks, even a few splotches on the sidewalk. It looked like someone had taken a roller to it in a blind rage. There was even a half-empty paint can tucked behind my hedges like a criminal trying to flee the scene. I checked the cameras. And there she was, Charlene, in a hoodie and gloves like some kind of low-budget vigilante, sneaking onto my property under cover of twilight with a gallon of desert sand from the local hardware store. I watched in disbelief as she haphazardly swiped paint over the trim and then jogged off into the night, nearly tripping over her own shoe. It would have been funny if it weren't so completely unhinged. I filed another report with the sheriff's office and forwarded the footage to both my insurance provider and the new HOA board. Then I called a local contractor to repaint the damaged areas. He took one look and said, "Let me guess. HOA drama." I just nodded and handed him the check. Charlene was officially banned from attending HOA meetings, but that didn't stop her from loitering. She'd park across the street during gatherings, just sitting in her car with the engine running, glaring at everyone who walked in like a vulture at a Tupperware party. When that didn't work, she took to writing anonymous letters. Typed, printed, unsigned, but riddled with her signature phrases like "respect the community standard" and "property uniformity." Most of the neighbors just laughed. Mrs. Park framed one. But it was the next stunt that really pushed things over the edge. I woke up one morning to find a full-page ad in our local paper. It wasn't large circulation, just the kind of community rag that covered bake sales and bingo result. The ad was a faux exposé titled, "The Man Behind the Mask. Is our new HOA puppet master really a neighbor or a narcissist?" It featured a pixelated screenshot of me from the pool security footage, standing with arms crossed as the sheriff arrived. The caption read, "Logan Hall, vigilante or villain?" Now I knew it was Charlene. No one else had that level of pettiness and access to unflattering screenshots of me in pajama pants. But accusing me of being a self-appointed dictator, and suggesting I was spying on the neighborhood through covert surveillance tools, was a new level of insanity. The funniest part? She quoted herself in the article under the alias, Concerned Resident C. I called Jeff again. This woman thinks she's running a smear campaign from a Disney villain starter kit, he said. We could go after her for defamation, easy. But it might be more fun to let her bury herself. He was right. Charlene was spiraling, and everyone could see it. Even her daughter Tiffany, who had started posting vague Instagram stories with captions like, "Some people don't know when to stop," and "Embarrassment is hereditary." Apparently, Charlene's antics were finally catching up to her in the only place that really mattered to her, social standing. That weekend, the new HOA board hosted a community cleanup event. We were trying to undo years of petty fines and neglected maintenance, and the turnout was surprisingly strong. People brought tools, snacks, even music. Kids helped plant flowers. It felt, for once, like an actual neighborhood instead of a Cold War zone. I brought my toolbox and ended up leading the effort to repair the old wooden gazebo Charlene had condemned as aesthetic clutter. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. About an hour in, Charlene appeared, like an apparition of sun hats and bad intentions. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she came anyway, claiming she was just walking her dog, even though she didn't own one. She circled the gazebo twice before finally approaching me, arms crossed. "This won't last," she said. I kept sanding the railing. "You mean the gazebo?" "Yeah, it needs a coat of stain, but we'll get there." "I mean your little dictatorship. You've turned the HOA into a joke. It used to mean something." I paused, looked up at her, and said, "Yeah. It meant arbitrary fines and hostile newsletters. Now it means community. Weird, right?" She glared at me like I'd just kicked her imaginary dog. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off. But she didn't leave the neighborhood. Charlene became our local cryptid, seen lurking behind hedges, filming people on her phone, muttering about bylaws and standard. The sheriff finally issued a no-contact order after she tried to follow one of the board members home, to make sure they weren't harboring illegal succulents. And while that might sound fake, I assure you it is tragically true. I saw the footage. The succulents were fine. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Charlene was desperate for control, and people like that don't stop. They plot. And I'd already taken her HOA seat, her fake dignity, and her ornamental pond. The only thing left was her home turf. So I made a call to a realtor friend, just to ask a few questions. My realtor, a brutally efficient woman named Celine, called me back within 24 hours. "Charlene's house is technically still hers," she said, "but she's behind on the HOA dues and the property taxes. Also, she applied for a second mortgage 4 months ago that still hasn't cleared. She's bleeding money, Logan." "Why do you ask?" I told her I was curious about market trends, which was only half a lie. The other half was the slow-brewing scheme that had been fermenting in the back of my mind like aged revenge whiskey. Charlene had ruled this neighborhood with a tacky rhinestone fist for too long. She'd weaponized petty power, turned minor inconveniences into full-blown investigations, and now that she was disarmed, she was spinning out like a drone with a dying battery. If I couldn't exile her, I'd simply outmaneuver her again. Here's the beautiful thing about HOA financials. When you stop paying dues and fines, the penalties stack. And in Charlene's case, her reign of terror had been so aggressive that when the board audited her record, they discovered she hadn't paid her own late fees for years. She'd quietly deleted them, manipulated the books, and funneled HOA resources into communal beautification that magically improved her own backyard. Now that her throne had crumbled, the debts became due. The board sent her a letter, polite, official, devastating. She owed nearly $19,000 in back dues, misappropriated funds, and repair charges. They gave her 60 days to pay or forfeit her property under the HOA's enforcement clause. She went ballistic. She called an emergency, neighborhood watch, meeting in her backyard. Just her and a few aging loyalists too confused or indifferent to realize she no longer held power. I know this because Mrs. Park live texted the whole thing from behind her curtain with binoculars and homemade lemonade. Apparently, Charlene stood on a patio chair and gave a full speech about corruption, conspiracies, and how I was an agent of municipal decay. Her words, not mine. I was flattered. As the days passed, her house fell into visible decline. The once manicured hedges wilted into unruly bushes. Her certified pollinator garden was now a glorified weed patch, and the porch light started flickering like it was trying to Morse code for help. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't escalate. I just watched. And waited. 3 weeks later, the notice went up. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. It was public. It was brutal. And it meant one thing: I could bid on it. Now, before you think I'm a monster, understand that I wasn't buying it to flip it or live in it. I had something much more poetic in mind. This house wasn't just where Charlene lived, it was where she launched her tyranny. Every fine, every nasty letter, every unsolicited landscaping critique had originated from that one stucco-covered lair. To truly end her reign, I needed to plant my flag in the very soil where it started. Celine helped me prep. We reviewed the auction terms, checked the liens, and verified the zoning. I made sure the HOA board backed me, officially. If I won the house, I'd convert it into something the neighborhood actually needed. A community space. A clubhouse. A memorial to what happens when power-hungry law enforcers go too far. The auction was held online, but I made an event out of it anyway. I invited a few neighbors over for snacks, projected the bidding screen onto my living room wall, and cracked open a bottle of whiskey labeled Charlene's Last Stand. The opening bid was low, too low. Charlene had ignored too many warnings, and now the bank just wanted to offload the burden. I watched as a few unfamiliar accounts placed cautious bids. Then I dropped my number. Aggressive. Decisive. Everyone else backed off. The moment the clock ran out and I got the congratulations screen, Mrs. Park stood up and rang a cowbell she brought from home. Charlene found out the next morning. She showed up on my porch in a ratty bathrobe, mascara still smudged from the night before, holding a manila envelope like it was a weapon. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't just take my house." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't take anything. You forfeited it by refusing to pay the very rules you enforced. I just bought what was left. You manipulated everything. You humiliated me. You turned the board against me." I sipped my coffee. "No, Charlene. You did that. I just gave you the rope." Her mouth worked like she wanted to scream but couldn't form the words. Then, suddenly, she thrust the envelope at me. "Well, here. Take your stupid keys. I'm moving in with my sister anyway. Have fun with the mold in the downstairs closet. And the squirrels in the attic." I took the envelope. "Thank you. I'll be sure to name one after you." She gasped like I'd slapped her, then turned and stormed off down the street, yelling into her phone about legal recourse and neighborhood betrayal. Nobody followed her. Nobody cared. The first thing I did was change the locks. The second thing I did was open every window and blast classical music while walking room to room with a clipboard, taking inventory of the damage. She hadn't been lying about the squirrels. There was a nest. But I wasn't discouraged. This place had potential. It just needed the right vision. Over the next month, I worked with the HOA to renovate the house into something new. We gutted the interior, removed all traces of faux Tuscan decor, and repainted everything in calming blues and whites. The living room became a reading lounge. The kitchen, a coffee bar. The backyard, where she had once berated neighbors for daring to grow unapproved perennials, was transformed into a shared garden. We even built a deck where the certified pollinator garden used to be. It finally attracted real bees. I named the new space the Cedars, after the neighborhood's original name before Charlene rebranded it, Oak Grove Estates, to sound fancier. We hosted game nights, potlucks, book clubs. People who had lived side by side for years but never really connected suddenly started showing up, talking, sharing. It was community, actual community, the kind Charlene always claimed to protect but never actually built. But my favorite part? The plaque. Right by the front entrance, mounted on a stone post, we installed a small bronze plaque. It read, "In memory of HOA tyranny. May we never again confuse authority with service." Every time someone new asked about it, the story came pouring out, how Charlene threw a pool party on private property, got evicted mid-backstroke, and spiraled into suburban infamy. It became legend. Even local realtors started using it as a selling point. Quiet neighborhood with strong community. Ask about the pool party house. And me? I never raised my voice. Never broke the law. Never threw a punch. I just played the long game. I turned every insult, every fine, every petty power grab into a stepping stone. And in the end, I didn't just get justice. I got her house. I got my piece. I got the Cedars. 6 months after I bought Charlene's house and turned it into the Cedars, something extraordinary happened. The neighborhood that had once been known for its cold stares and yard-measuring tape battles suddenly found a heartbeat. Kids who had been scolded for riding scooters on sidewalks now raced each other past Charlene's old hedges, which we'd trimmed into cheerful arches. The garden bloomed. The community bloomed. People lingered on porches, laughed out loud, shared actual sugar, not lawsuit. For once, the HOA was functioning like it was supposed to, not as a dictatorship in yoga pants, but as a cooperative. That word felt almost radical. Cooperative. We held our first official neighborhood festival in the newly renamed backyard, where once Charlene had hoarded mimosas and banned unlicensed picnic tables. We now had string lights, folding chairs, and a homemade ice cream stand manned by 2 retirees who were living their best lives. Mrs. Park organized a raffle. The Flanagans played bluegrass on a banjo and a washboard. Even Tiffany, yes, that Tiffany, showed up with her boyfriend and a box of cupcakes that said, "Sorry for everything." Apparently, she'd started therapy and was doing great. Her boyfriend taught meditation to toddlers. I'll admit, I was skeptical, but one of them calmly dismantled a wasp nest near the lemonade stand with nothing but kind words and a peppermint spray. Who was I to argue? As for Charlene, she'd vanished. Physically, anyway. She moved 2 towns over to live with her sister, who apparently had her own HOA drama and thought Charlene might help. That's the kind of hubris only a blood relative can produce. We occasionally heard rumors. She was working as a compliance consultant, had started a blog called Suburban Saviors, and once tried to report her local library for off-brand mulch. None of it surprised me. But just when I thought she'd finally faded into irrelevance, she made one last, glorious return. It was late fall. The leaves were bright, the breeze was brisk, and we were setting up a small harvest market at the Cedars. I was unloading a crate of pumpkins when I noticed a familiar Lexus slowly creeping down the street like a shark that got lost in a koi pond. The windows were tinted, but I knew. We all knew. Sure enough, it pulled into a visitor spot at the far end of the cul-de-sac, and out stepped Charlene, now platinum blonde, wearing enormous heels and a velvet blazer that made her look like she'd just come from a courtroom or a vampire-themed gala. She strode toward the Cedars with that same righteous indignation she always carried, like she expected the grass to part for her. But no one flinched. No one even greeted her. In fact, the moment she crossed the threshold, the new HOA president, Mrs. Park herself, stepped out from behind the cider booth and blocked her path like a boss battle NPC. "Charlene," she said warmly but firmly, "this is a community-only event. You're not on the list." Charlene scoffed. "This was my neighborhood. I built this place." Mrs. Park didn't blink. "And now it's better." "I just want to see the house," Charlene said. "I have memories here." "You mean the house you trespassed from, forfeited through delinquent dues, and vandalized with unsolicited beige paint?" I asked, walking up beside Mrs. Park. She turned to me like I'd just kicked sand in her face. "You manipulated everything. You poisoned them against me." "Charlene," I said, with a grin so dry it could sand wood. You lit the match? I just owned the fire department. She looked around, as if expecting someone to come to her defense. But the only responses were kids laughing, dogs barking, and someone playing acoustic Taylor Swift near the fire pit. She was a ghost haunting a party she no longer had a key to. And for once, she knew it. She didn't lash out, didn't yell, just narrowed her eyes and whispered, "You think you've won. But all of this, is temporary." I tilted my head. "You're right. So was your power. Funny how that works." She turned and walked away without another word. That was the last time we saw her. Time passed. The cedars grew. The HOA board, now chaired by Mrs. Park with a team of people who'd previously been branded troublemakers, reformed the entire system. Gone were the vague violations and arbitrary fines. In their place were open meetings, monthly budgets, and an app where people could suggest improvements or report issues without fear of a glitter-fueled vendetta. We started a tool-sharing program, a community pantry, even a shared library box with a permanent plaque that read, "Leave a book, take a lesson." A kid named Milo wrote that, and I told him I was stealing it. He said that was fine as long as he got to be famous someday. I built a bench in the corner of the garden under a trellis of climbing roses. It became my spot. I'd sit there in the mornings with coffee and listen to the soft hum of neighborhood life returning to balance. Every once in a while, someone would sit next to me and ask about the Charlene years. I'd tell them the story. About the pool party, the eviction, the flamingo float, the eviction mid-backstroke. It always got a laugh. But what I never said out loud, what I only allowed myself to feel sitting on that bench, was how proud I was. Not of revenge. Not of petty victory. But of the fact that I'd taken chaos and turned it into something beautiful. The Cedars wasn't just a clubhouse. It was a monument to the idea that power in the wrong hands is dangerous, but in the right hands, it's transformative. And no, I didn't run for HOA president. That would have been too easy. Too loud. I preferred the shadows. The long game. Besides, Mrs. Park made a better face of change than I ever could. But I did become something of a legend. Every neighborhood has stories. Urban myths, folklore, tales whispered at block parties. Ours had me. The guy who evicted Karen mid-backstroke, bought her house, and turned it into a symbol of peace. Kids asked if I had a secret underground bunker. Adults asked me to help write their HOA rebuttal letters. I never charged. It wasn't about money. It was about keeping balance. And if balance ever tipped again? If some new Charlene rose from the trimmed hedges to declare herself queen of code violations? Well, let's just say I'd already drawn up the paperwork.